Hi guys, Pax Europiana here again. This time it's the 16th of March and it's day 21 of this terrible war of Russia against Ukraine. And I am, of course, it's a terrible tragedy, but I'm now convinced that Ukraine will win. It was not sure for me. I was also shell shocked in a way from this terrible disaster, and I was in a big crisis because I never thought that this will happen. I never thought that Putin will be so crazy and he will do such terrible crimes, but he has done it and he is guilty. He will end up like Milosevic in Den Haag, and Ukraine will win. I will give you, it's not just my optimism on purpose, I will give you my assessment in four different sections why this is the case and why actually he has already lost. There's basically four elements which are very important to see, and these are the basis for my strong belief that Putin has lost, Ukraine will win. It is the first one. First of all, America, after 3 weeks, has now, it took some time to digest, to understand, yeah. But the political climate in America has completely changed, yeah. It is back to the hawkish times of the Cold War. The only one who is basically holding back the American juggernaut to intervene heavily against Russia is President Biden himself, trying to be careful, and all this talk about not World War III and all these things. That's all very important, but he cannot hold back the dynamics of the political system of America, and it's the only power in the world which can stop Putin. It's the only protection power. I have said this all along. Yeah, we are living under the American nuclear umbrella. America is the only armed military might in the world to be ready to stop Putin, and ultimately it will. Of course, I don't know if there will be a 100% intervention, a naval blockade, a no-fly zone, but the dynamics have now shifted towards intervention. It's very clear both sides of the political party lines of America, even the GOP, the conservatives, which I was so admiring in the Cold War, they have found out again they have basically this whole idea that this Putin has dominated them is of course like treason, and they want to purge themselves from that one. And they are, they are always have been for military intervention, and they want to certainly not lose. I mean, the idea that they will lose, yeah, that America will lose in Ukraine is unimaginable for them. And also the Democrats, they are all now in all dimensions, they are for intervention. And in some way or another, they will intervene. Of course, careful, of course, maybe not exactly as Mr. Zelensky needs it, but there will be military intervention. That is absolutely sure. President Biden is coming for that to the summit next week in Brussels, and there will be some kind of major step up of the American contribution, either with soldiers in NATO or the eastern flank, but massively, or with the naval blockade, yeah, or with the also a no-fly zone, which I say all the time, west of the Dnieper. It works as well in Syria. And in Syria as well, the Americans have killed hundreds of Russian mercenaries. Yeah? So it's not that automatically one killed Russian leads to to nuclear war. Nuclear war is always, and I have to explain again, it's always mutually assured destruction. And it was Stalin who was tinkering on the nuclear button in 53, and he didn't survive it because Beria killed him. Yeah? And it was also Khrushchev which was sent into retirement by Suslov because it was tinkering with the nuclear button. This is not the Russian system is not banned for self-destruction. No system is. And Putin cannot overstretch his support also in the elite of his country, because when America will now also go much more involved into the defense of Eastern Europe and of Ukraine, then ultimately they have not the resources to win that. That's the first thing. That's the most important thing, because ultimately only America can contain Russia, and we are all, in a way, Americans living under the American security umbrella since 49, and all this anti-American sovereignty is all bullshit, yeah. And Macron is on the way out, I'm confident he will lose in April, and he has also created this war very much together with Mr. and Mrs. Merkel because he has not defended Ukraine and he has distanced himself from Ukraine's defense, and that's, I think, very clear. So he has to go, and also Europe will be much more united. We are currently not united, just to make that very clear, because the Versailles summit, it was a show of unity, but we have basically, there was a deal about the EU accession of Ukraine in exchange for Germany to be allowed to continue to buy energy, but this will end now. The train is gone. The train is gone with the three prime ministers to Kiev. And basically, the Eastern Europeans will not be subdued by Germany anymore in a kind of pro Russian philosophy and energy complicity. No, they will close the pipelines, they will cut all these links, and I'm confident at the summit on the 23rd and 24th March, there will be the end of the energy imports decided, and a complete trade boycott of Russia. And this is now inevitable, and it will happen. The German opposition is already 100% behind the end of energy import. They have seen the weakness, and it's highly likely, and I hope for that, that the German government will fall under this crisis if they don't join the European line, because it's a big crisis for Europe. It is the ultimate crisis for Europe ultimately. So if they don't join, then Europe will break up. We see already the breakup of Visegrad, Orban staying with Putin basically and hoping he will be the peace hero. He might actually, there's some reports he is very popular now in Hungary. Good, but he is certainly not popular in Poland anymore, in Czech Republic or Slovenia. I don't know why the Slovaks didn't go, but nevertheless. And you see also the Northern Europeans are running to the United Kingdom to safety. They even call it the Joint Expeditionary Force. Yeah, so there is the Swedish neutrals and the Finnish neutrals are part of that. So you see the whole forces of divergence and of centrifugal forces in Europe are in full swing on that question. So if Europe and Germany doesn't fall in line with the West, then it is very, very dangerous moment for Europe. So they will do that as well under American pressure, and it will be exactly like that during the next week. Yeah? So these are the two major forces. Economically, then Russia will be blocked from the European markets fully. We will not buy anything anymore. And it's the end of March, then the spring is starting. So we will have to cope, and we will cope. Now the leading economists of Europe are already, and of Germany in a sense, like Mr. Hütter and others, they have changed their opinion from it is impossible towards it's expensive, but doable. The oil can be brought via Danzig and via Rostock, and so it's no problem. The oil, the gas is of course more complicated, but there will be deliveries from other parts of the world. America will not let Europe alone in that way, and there is also always the opportunity to work much closer together, especially with Saudi Arabia. So we cannot do a deal with Iran. And no, Iran is a Russian proxy. So Saudi Arabia must be courted, as painful as that is for some of the human rights issues they have. But we will do it exactly like in the past. And also Europe can conclude a free trade agreement with the Gulf Cooperation Council. And also, by the way, with Mercosur, both of them are ready. They were blocked by the PISAs because of various interests and philosophies, but they must be both now adopted very fast, put in force by the EU Commission President, and then we have also that situation. Yeah, I think also then there will be, it's very important to have more products on the world markets because of the lack of supply from Russia and from Ukraine. And so it only can be done in the case of oil from Saudi Arabia and in the case of wheat and other agricultural products from Brazil. So we need to do these two free trade agreements. The fourth area is, of course, Ukraine's resistance. Ukraine is resisting, and they have a working political structure led by the European hero, global hero, Mr. Zelensky. They have a working military structure. It works actually very good. They have working supply lines. They have the motivation. They have the morals. They have the will to fight, and it's backed by the population who wants to resist. There is no quisling regimes. There is no kind of collaboration happening. There is all this, what could happen is not happening. there is a clear will of the population and of the electorate and of the taxpayers and of the consumers to resist. They bring the women in safety and they go back to fight. So that's very important. There is also the military supply lines. Of course, it's not enough. Financially, there's the supply of the EU is not enough. Of course, the Americans are giving 14 billions, the Europeans 1 billion. That's all very shameful because of German complicity and Austrian as well. But at least, they are helpful on the refugee sides. But this will all change now because Ukraine obviously needs a lot of money, needs a lot of weapons. It will come. It will come significantly from Europe and from America. I've already written about the arsenal of democracy which Europe has to be. We are not really 100% that way, but it will develop. I'm confident the next week summits will make a big difference. And so that's very important. But I was talking about Ukraine now. So Ukraine has the will to fight, the capacity to fight, the leadership to fight, the social consensus to fight, and the military capacity to fight. Yeah? And they are doing that. And that's really very important at that moment because that gives the time for the West to mobilize resources, for the public opinion to change. And, it's basically, it's of course a very hard fight, but they're having military successes in a way. And Russia has by far not the military success they would need at this stage of the campaign to really win. Let's come to Russia. That's the fourth big pillar of why Ukraine will win, because Russia will lose. It's actually a very big country, Ukraine. So you can, with your tanks, move from the north and from the east and from the south. You can move certain distances, yeah? But you would need to subdue a country of the size of Ukraine, you would need much more people, not 200,000, but maybe 1 million people. This is imagine always how, for example, Hitler Germany has attacked Soviet Russia with millions of soldiers. I'm talking millions. I think it was 3 to 4 million people which were on the move. And this is the dimension you need for such a country. It's maybe of course, you have technology advances, but it's also, when you have technology advances, you also need a lot of technology. That's very difficult to transport in a hostile environment, which Ukraine to this day is for Russia. They have very little room to maneuver. They have very little room to supply. All the supply routes are under attack. And this is just, 3 weeks where they basically have stalled. They make some progress in the south because that's maybe easier to supply for them for Crimea, because they basically turned to Crimea, what we always said, in this big bridgehead of supply for the Russian army. But nevertheless, they run out of all this now. And so there is no way for them to win all this anymore. And there's also that's the military, basically the projection capacities of their military is reduced. The additional is that their social consensus at home is not existing. They even don't call the war. It's not the great patriotic war of the Second World War. They don't tell it like this. They say it's a military operation. But the longer the war takes, the more the people in Russia know that. There's the first people running, and there's quite a lot of people, actually, journalists resigning and so. So the social fabric of Russia is crumbling. And of course the sanctions also have an effect. By far not the one which I say they should, because we have sent now 9 billion of the European Union every day. It's getting more for Russia and 1 billion only for Ukraine. So it's utterly a disaster that we have not cut the energy completely. But by the end of March we will. So, but nevertheless, the whole packages of sanctions, they meet and they target the oligarchs. That's of course, they are really very annoyed losing all their €1 billion assets and the triple million yachts. That has some effect. It has some effect, of course. Also, the ruble is now no longer convertible. That's a lot of restrictions. And the Putin system is not the slave system of the Soviet Union. The Putin system is a system which is based on force and on success. he has brought some stability and success and progress in the last 20 years with all this international energy system and the revenues. There was, of course, it's very unfair system and it's very biased, but you have a third of the population which lives like Europeans in some ways on this level. Of course, you have a lot of people who live on $250 a month, yeah? But you have, of course, working middle class. And this was the two-tier system, violence and success. And now, of course, the success is breaking away. He's substituting it with violence. But you can do that just to some extent. Yeah? You can do that, of course, in the long term. He could recreate the Soviet Union and bring the people to the prosperity level of the 1980s and also then to the freedom level, basically, of slavery of the 1980s. But it's very difficult to do. And it's very hard then to say, we are successful. This whole system is crumbling. And the longer the war takes, the more the system and the social consensus behind him is crumbling. So he is in a big danger of being removed by his elite. Yeah? Of course, that's not immediate. But the war is probably also not ending immediately. It has this opportunity to be a very long war, which I think would be very bad, and it will be ultimately won by Ukraine, and Russia will lose as well. And even Russia will break. The longer the war takes, even then Russia will break in parts and it will be a complete disaster. So it's basically very much in Putin's interest to now stop the war. Because of all these factors, he cannot win anymore. And he has now made some land gain. We will be hard to remove him from the land gains. And what he basically is now already doing is negotiating for how much of Ukraine will be under his occupation regime. And I say always it's the best to make sure that the Dnieper is the Armistice line, because that's a much more logical and keepable and defendable line. But of course, that's huge losses for Ukraine. But of course, then Ukraine has in exchange all this territory where Putin is already having some success in Kherson and Mykolaiv. So that is, they would have to leave from there. And that would guarantee the access to the Black Sea, and it would make a stable country in a sense, like the Western German Republic. It could join NATO. That's, by the way, very important. All of these peace proposals or armistice, it's not a peace, it will never be peace with Russia anymore. We will now be on constant high level of alert. The idea that we now go back and everything is fine after all these crimes is totally ridiculous. So what we should do is to make sure that Ukraine joins NATO and the EU. If it's only Western Ukraine, west of the Dnieper, it's the best way to handle it at the moment. And then we will, of course, Reconquista and unification will be the lead topic by time. And it will happen over time when Russia will crumble under the continuous sanction pressure, because in no way we will remove the sanctions. That's also an illusion. So even when there will be an armistice, we will not go back to normal to Russia. On the contrary. So it will be a constant economic disintegration of Russia from the world economy. And it will crumble, and that's also for sure. So Putin has started the end of the Russian Empire with his failed campaign in Ukraine. He can gain some land more, he can do a lot of brutality more. He will kill a lot of people. But, the more brutal he is, the more resistance there will be from the Ukrainians, and the more the European and American public opinion will shift completely against him, and he will be irreversibly isolated. So the more people he kills now, the more cities he bombards, the longer, and he will never take Kiev. It's already decided, because there is a lot of will of resistance, there's a lot of will of people, so he can do a lot, and there's a lot of supplies, so he can do a month-long siege and bombard with artillery and with aircraft. It will just speed up the military intervention. And so basically Russia has lost. There's no way for them to win anymore, and they should sue for an armistice with some kind of territorial gains, and then they can erect their Quisling regime over there, and we will never recognize it. And so that will be the way for Putin out. If he wants to, of course, stay on and fight on, he will ultimately lose as well, because he will be much higher cost, much more will to intervene in the West, and he cannot fear us too much with this nuclear threat, because we will simply escalate as well, and his social consensus, his state consensus, his elite consensus will crumble before ours. So it made it hard to explain to people that we will nuclear escalate, but we will do that if necessary, and he will be losing. So it's much better for Putin to somehow consolidate his unlawful gains now and to accept an armistice. And that's why I think there is also these negotiations already going on, because the logical consequence of his crimes is that the longer they continue, he will lose everything. And some cynical may say, let's continue even longer, because then we are rid of Putin fully, because he cannot fiscally, financially, from an industrial base, and China will also not save him. There's no way China will save him, because there's a lot of efforts going on to break up that alliance, and ultimately they don't want. They are our producers. They sell to us. They will not be able to sustain that kind of thing, and Putin is on the way out, basically. The longer he fights now, the faster he will fall. And that's the logic of economics. And there is no way he can escape that. But obviously, what must happen now is a complete boycott of Russian energy, complete economic isolation, a naval blockade, a no-fly zone, and also the start of the preparation for military intervention. We need 100,000 American soldiers in Poland and in Romania, and we need the American naval assets in the Black Sea, and we need to make sure that we are ready here to win, and that will be the signal for the defeat of Russia. And we need, of course, Ukraine to be able to resist every week more, every month more, and there will be many months more if necessary, many years. Ukraine can fight for years. Why not? If it's necessary, they will do that. And the morals of the Russians will be crumbling every single day. If it's needed, then the fall of Putin will be, I think, it's hard to say April, I don't think so, but over the summer, if the war tracks like that, Putin, there will be the revolution in Russia. They will have hardly anything to eat left, and that will be very, very deeply problematic in the next winter for them. And so I think it's very clear that the economics of the situation and the geostrategic realignment is working very much against Russia. They've committed a terrible crime, and this terrible crime they will pay very dearly, and they will lose in this war. There is no way they can win anymore. And now the European American public opinions are absolutely in favor of Ukraine victory. I would say it's like this in American more. In Germany still it's a focus on peace, but in America they are bent for victory already. And in the UK as well, and the things have shifted, and they're shifting more. And after 3 weeks of also of me being shell-shocked, I'm now convinced that Ukraine will win and Russia will lose, and I pray for that. Slava Ukraine, thanks a lot. More to come from Pax Europiana. There will be peace and Russia will be defeated. Thanks a lot. Bye.